It was a warm, restless evening in Austin, Texas. Mark Sanders gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles whitening in the dim light of the car's dashboard. Beside him, Beth stared out the window, her arms crossed, lips pressed in a thin line. The air between them was thick with tension, like a storm brewing but refusing to break. The evening had started innocently enough. A neighbor's party, a chance to unwind after weeks of monotony. Mark, a meticulous and reserved software engineer, wasn't a fan of social gatherings, but Beth, his adventurous wife, had insisted. "It'll be fun," she'd said, flashing him the same playful smile that once melted his worries. Tonight, though, that smile felt forced, a veneer over something deeper. The party had been far from ordinary. As they stepped through the door, the laughter was louder, the gazes more knowing. The host, a jovial man with a wine glass perpetually in hand, had explained the tradition with a wink. Couples tossed their car keys into a bowl. At the end of the night, the keys were redistributed. It didn't take a genius to grasp the implication. Mark's stomach churned. He glanced at Beth, expecting her to share his unease, but she was already laughing along, her voice blending with the crowd's. "You didn't tell me this was this kind of party," he whispered. Beth shrugged, her tone nonchalant. "It's harmless." And harmless. Mark doubted that. Watching strangers flirt openly, the boundaries of their marriages seemingly non-existent. He felt like a foreigner in a land where nothing made sense. "This isn't us," he murmured. But Beth didn't seem to agree. "Mark, we're stuck. Don't you see? This could be an escape, a way to shake things up." "Shake things up." His voice rose slightly, drawing a few curious glances. He lowered it again. "Beth, this isn't shaking things up. This is wrecking things." The host interrupted, handing Mark a drink and patting him on the shoulder. "Relax, buddy. It's all in good fun." Mark didn't respond. He placed the untouched drink on a nearby table and pulled Beth aside. "We're leaving," he said firmly. Beth frowned. "You're being ridiculous. Why can't you just?" "Because this isn't what I signed up for." His words were sharper than he intended, but he didn't care. He hated how easily she seemed to dismiss his discomfort. "We leave now, or—" He hesitated, the weight of what he was about to say hanging between them. "Or you stay here alone. Your choice." Beth's eyes widened, but there was no apology in her gaze. She looked defiant. For a moment, Mark thought she'd call his bluff, but then she exhaled sharply. "Fine, let's go." The ride home was silent, save for the occasional blare of a car horn in the distance. Mark replayed the evening in his mind, each detail scratching at his composure like nails on a chalkboard. Beth's ease with the situation, her laughter, the way she looked at him as if he were the one being unreasonable. He wanted to ask her what had happened to them, but the words felt futile. When they finally pulled into the driveway, Beth turned to him. "You humiliated me tonight," she said, her voice low but steady. Mark blinked, his anger reigniting. "I humiliated you? You dragged me to that circus, and I'm the one who should be embarrassed. I wanted to try something different, to save us, Mark. Save us." He laughed bitterly. "You think throwing away everything we've built is saving us?" Beth didn't respond. She slammed the car door and stalked into the house, leaving Mark alone with his thoughts. He stared after her, the weight of the evening crashing down on him like a tidal wave. How had they gotten here? 7 years of marriage, 2 beautiful children, and now this, a chasm so wide it seemed impossible to bridge. Inside, the argument resumed, sharper this time, more cutting. Beth accused Mark of being too rigid, too afraid of change. Mark countered that Beth was reckless, always chasing something new without considering the consequences. Neither backed down. Finally, Beth stormed out. "I need space," she said, grabbing her keys. "Where are you going?" Mark demanded. "Out." "Beth, don't." But she was already gone. Mark sat on the couch, his head in his hands. Hours passed, and still she didn't return. When she finally did, it was close to dawn. She avoided his gaze as she slipped into their bedroom, saying nothing. It wasn't until later that day, when Mark overheard a hushed phone call, that he began to suspect the truth. Her tone was soft, intimate. "Last night was unexpected," she said, her words a dagger to his chest. The pieces clicked together in Mark's mind. She hadn't just needed space. She had spent the night with someone from the party. The realization was a physical blow, leaving him breathless. His hands shook as he packed a bag, his heart breaking with every step. When Beth finally emerged, she looked at him, startled. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving," he said simply. "I can't do this anymore." Mark wait, but he didn't wait. He couldn't. Betrayal hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. As he walked out the door, he felt a strange mix of pain and relief. Pain for what they had lost. Relief that he no longer had to pretend everything was fine. This was the end of their story, or so Mark thought. But as he drove away, tears blurring his vision, he couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps it was just the beginning of something else. Mark Sanders had always lived his life with structure, order, and predictability. But after the devastating collapse of his marriage to Beth, those principles had been shattered. He found himself staying in a small, dimly lit room at a roadside motel just outside Austin. The stark, sterile environment felt like a reflection of his inner turmoil. Days passed in a blur of emptiness as he grappled with betrayal, loss, and uncertainty about his future. One evening, exhausted from staring at the walls of his room, Mark decided to visit the nearby diner for dinner. It was a simple, no-frills establishment, a place that seemed untouched by time. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, offering a strange sense of comfort. Mark slid into a booth in the corner, not expecting much from the evening. That's when he first saw her. The first encounter. Mia Thompson was carrying a tray of drinks with one hand, her other hand balancing a small stack of menus. Her auburn hair was tied back in a loose bun, and she had a warm, approachable presence that seemed to light up the room. She moved with practiced grace, weaving between tables and offering smiles to customers. Mark noticed the way she seemed genuinely interested in the stories of those she served, leaning in just slightly when they spoke, her eyes attentive. When she reached Mark's table, she gave him a polite smile. "Hi there. What can I get for you tonight?" Mark hesitated, his voice rusty from lack of use. Coffee. And whatever your special is." "Meatloaf with mashed potatoes," she said, jotting it down. "Coming right up." Their interaction was brief, but Mark found himself watching her from the corner of his eye as she worked. There was something magnetic about her. Not just her appearance, but the way she seemed genuinely present in every moment. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt drawn to someone like this. Breaking the ice. Over the next few days, Mark became a regular at the diner. It wasn't intentional at first. He simply needed somewhere to eat, and the food was decent. But as he grew familiar with the place, he started looking forward to Mia's shifts. She would always greet him with the same warm smile, and soon, their conversations began to stretch beyond the usual pleasantries. "You look like someone who's thinking too much," Mia said one evening as she refilled his coffee. Mark chuckled softly. "Is it that obvious?" "It's a gift," she replied with a teasing grin. "Seriously, though, you seem lost." Mark hesitated. He wasn't used to opening up, especially not to someone he barely knew. But there was something disarming about Mia. Slowly, he began to share fragments of his story. The strained marriage, the party, the betrayal. Mia listened without judgment, her expression thoughtful. "That's a lot to carry," she said softly. "I'm sorry you've been through that." Her empathy took Mark by surprise. He realized he had underestimated how much he needed someone to simply listen. From that moment, their bond began to grow. Shared moments. As weeks passed, Mark and Mia's conversations grew deeper. Mia shared pieces of her own life, how she was a single mother to a 6-year-old boy named Liam, balancing work at the diner with online classes in psychology. She spoke of her dreams to one day become a counselor, helping people navigate their own struggles. "You're already good at that," Mark said one night, surprising himself with the sincerity of his words. "You're helping me, and you don't even know it." Mia's cheeks flushed slightly, but she smiled. "Maybe that's just because you're easy to talk to." They found common ground in their shared experiences of heartbreak. Mia's ex-husband had left her when Liam was barely 2, chasing after a younger woman and leaving her to pick up the pieces. She didn't speak of him often, but when she did, Mark could hear the lingering pain in her voice. Despite their respective wounds, there was a sense of hope that grew between them. They began to share small joys, Mark teaching Mia's son a card trick, Mia introducing Mark to her favorite walking trail by the river. For the first time in months, Mark felt a flicker of something he thought he'd lost: happiness. Supporting characters. Their budding relationship didn't go unnoticed. Mia's best friend, Samantha, was quick to offer her opinion. "He seems nice, but are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked over coffee one morning. Mia sighed. "I don't know. It's not like I planned any of this. But there's something about him. He's been hurt, just like me. And that's exactly why you need to be careful," Samantha warned. "Two people with baggage? That can get messy." On the other side, Mark confided in James, his colleague and longtime friend. James was more encouraging. "Look, you've been through hell. If this woman makes you happy, who cares what anyone else thinks? Life's too short to overanalyze everything." These outside perspectives added complexity to their dynamic, reminding both Mark and Mia that their connection wasn't without its risks. Challenges arise. Not everything was smooth sailing. Mark struggled with guilt over moving on so quickly, especially when his children were involved. Emma, his 8-year-old daughter, asked him pointedly one evening, "Daddy, are you and Mommy ever going to live together again?" The question cut deeper than Mark expected. He knelt beside her, trying to explain in terms she could understand. "Mommy and I will always love you and Noah, but sometimes grown-ups need to live in different houses to be happy." "But you're not happy," Emma said simply. Her words stayed with him, making him question whether he was being selfish by pursuing a new relationship. Mia, too, faced her own struggles. Her ex-husband, Jason, resurfaced unexpectedly, claiming he wanted to reconnect with Liam. The timing felt suspicious to Mia, and she couldn't help but wonder if Jason had heard about Mark and was trying to reassert control. The tension weighed heavily on her, and Mark found himself stepping in to support her, despite his own challenges. Symbolic moments. As their connection deepened, certain moments took on symbolic significance. One rainy afternoon, Mark surprised Mia with a small gift, a leather-bound journal. "For all the dreams you haven't written down yet," he said. Mia ran her fingers over the cover, her eyes glistening. "You're the first person who's ever believed in me like this." Another time, Mia brought Mark to a secluded spot by the lake, a place she used to visit as a child when she needed to think. They sat on the shore, watching the water ripple in the breeze. "This is where I come to feel free," she said softly. Mark reached for her hand. "Maybe we can both learn to feel free again." Conflict and reflection. Just when things seemed to be falling into place, a major conflict arose. Beth, Mark's ex-wife, learned about Mia and became confrontational. She accused Mark of putting his relationship with Mia above his responsibilities as a father. "I'm not trying to replace you," Mia said calmly during a tense exchange. "I just want what's best for the kids." Beth wasn't convinced, and her hostility put a strain on Mark and Mia's relationship. Mia began to pull back, fearing that her presence was causing more harm than good. "I don't want to come between you and your kids," she said one evening, her voice heavy with emotion. Mark was heartbroken but understood her hesitation. Still, he wasn't willing to let her go. "You're not coming between anything," he said firmly. "You've helped me become a better father, a better person. I'm not losing that." The breaking point. Earlier that day, Mark had returned from a tense meeting with Beth and her lawyer. Beth had upped the stakes, demanding sole custody of their children. Her argument was simple. Mark's relationship with Mia proved he was too distracted to be a proper father. "This isn't about what's best for the kids, Beth," Mark said. his voice low but firm. This is about control. Beth didn't deny it. Instead, she leaned forward, her eyes cold. You walked out on this family for some waitress, Mark. What did you expect would happen? Her words cut deep. Mark knew he hadn't been perfect, but he also knew Beth's actions had destroyed their marriage. He left the meeting feeling like he was drowning in a sea of guilt and frustration. When he called Mia to talk, her voice was distant. Maybe she's right, Mia said softly. Maybe I'm the problem. You are not the problem, Mark insisted. But Mia was unconvinced. That evening, she called him again, this time to say goodbye. Mark, I can't be the reason you lose your kids. You need to focus on them. Mia, don't do this, he pleaded, his voice cracking. We can figure this out. But she had already made up her mind. You're a good man, Mark. That's why I can't stay. The call ended, leaving Mark with a hollow ache that felt unbearable. He drove to the lake, their place, hoping to find clarity. But instead, he found only more doubt. Mia's trial. On the other side of town, Mia sat in her cramped apartment, staring at the journal Mark had given her. Her son, Liam, was asleep in the next room, his soft snores a reminder of what was truly at stake. Jason, her ex-husband, had shown up unannounced earlier that evening, demanding to talk. You're really dragging another man into Liam's life? He sneered, leaning against the doorframe. Mark is nothing like you. Mia shot back, her voice trembling. Jason smirked. Maybe not now, but people change. You thought I was perfect once, too. His words lingered after he left, fueling the doubts that had already taken root. Was she repeating her mistakes? What if Mark eventually resented her for the sacrifices he'd have to make? What if his children grew to hate her for complicating their lives? Mia buried her face in her hands, torn between her feelings for Mark and her desire to protect both him and Liam from further pain. The test of love. The next day, Mark made a decision. He wasn't going to let Mia walk away without a fight. He left the motel early and drove straight to her apartment. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in surprise. Mark, what are you doing here? She asked, her tone guarded. I'm not letting you end this because of Beth or Jason or anyone else, he said, his voice steady. I know this isn't easy. It's messy and complicated, but what we have, it's worth fighting for. Mia shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. You don't understand. If Beth wins custody, if Jason decides to stir things up, it could ruin everything for you. Mark stepped closer, taking her hands in his. I'd rather fight every day with you than spend another second living without you. I love you, Mia. I know I've got baggage, and so do you, but that's life. It's not perfect, but it's real. For a moment, Mia didn't respond. Then, finally, she whispered, I love you too. Hell breaks loose. Their reunion was short-lived. That afternoon, Mark received a call from his lawyer. Beth's filed for an emergency custody hearing, the lawyer said. It's aggressive. She's claiming you're unstable and prioritizing your relationship over your kids. Mark's stomach dropped. When's the hearing? Tomorrow. The news sent shockwaves through Mark and Mia. The stakes had never been higher. Mark spent the evening preparing, combing through documents, texts, and emails to prove he was a committed father. Mia stayed by his side, offering quiet support, but the tension was palpable. The hearing the next day was brutal. Beth's lawyer painted a picture of Mark as irresponsible and distracted, while Beth herself shed crocodile tears on the stand, claiming she was only trying to protect the children. Mark's lawyer countered with evidence of his devotion to Emma and Noah, school pickups, doctor's appointments, and heartfelt notes from the kids themselves. When Mark took the stand, he spoke passionately about his love for his children and his determination to give them a stable, loving environment. Mia, watching from the back of the courtroom, felt her heart ache for him. She could see how much he loved his kids and how much this fight was costing him emotionally. The turning point. After hours of testimony, the judge called a recess. Mark and Mia stepped outside for a moment of fresh air. Mark looked exhausted, his tie loosened and his hands shaking slightly. "You're doing great," Mia said softly, placing a hand on his arm. Mark managed a weak smile. "I just want them to see the truth, that I'm doing my best." "They'll see it," Mia assured him. "You've got this." The final moments of the hearing were tense. The judge listened intently as both sides gave their closing arguments. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he delivered his decision. Mark would retain joint custody, with stipulations that ensured the children's well-being. Relief washed over Mark like a tidal wave. He turned to Mia, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said, proving their love. The custody battle wasn't the end of their trials. Over the following weeks, Mark and Mia faced relentless scrutiny from Beth and Jason, who seemed determined to undermine their relationship. But instead of letting the pressure tear them apart, it brought them closer together. Mark took Mia and Liam to the lake one evening, a symbolic return to the place where their bond had deepened. As the kids played nearby, Mark turned to Mia. "I know this hasn't been easy, but I need you to know, I'm all in. For you, for Liam, for us." Mia smiled through her tears. "I'm all in too." They sealed their commitment not with grand gestures, but with quiet determination, proving their love not through words but through actions. Together, they weathered every storm, finding strength in each other and hope in their shared future. For the first time, Mark and Mia felt like they weren't just surviving. They were building something real, something worth fighting for. Resolution. A fresh beginning. The morning light streamed through the window of Mark's modest home as the sound of children's laughter filled the air. Emma and Noah were playing with Liam in the living room, their voices mingling in a symphony of joy. Mark stood in the kitchen, flipping pancakes, a small smile tugging at his lips. It had been months since the custody hearing, and though life hadn't returned to its previous simplicity, there was a peace in his home that he hadn't felt in years. Mia entered, still tying her hair into a loose braid, and walked up to Mark. "Need some help?" He turned, his eyes softening at the sight of her. "You've already done enough by wrangling the kids. I've got this." Mia smiled and leaned against the counter, watching him. There was a warmth between them now, a quiet strength forged in the fire of their struggles. It wasn't the kind of love that demanded perfection. It was the kind that grew in the soil of acceptance and understanding. Reconciliation with Beth. Beth had been a storm in their lives for so long that the sudden calm between her and Mark felt almost unnatural. After the custody battle, she had softened, perhaps realizing the damage she had caused, not just to Mark, but to their children. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but there were signs of change. One day, Beth came by to drop off Emma and Noah. As the kids ran inside, she lingered on the porch, shifting nervously. "Mark," she said hesitantly, "can we talk?" He nodded, stepping outside. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she began, avoiding his eyes. "I wasn't fair to you. I let my anger and jealousy cloud my judgment." Mark leaned against the railing, letting her words sink in. "I'm not blameless either, Beth. We both made mistakes." She finally met his gaze. "I want to do better for the kids. Maybe even for us. As co-parents, I mean." It was a moment of clarity for both of them. They weren't meant to be together anymore, but they could still rebuild something important. A partnership rooted in their shared love for Emma and Noah. Over time, they established boundaries and a rhythm that worked, creating a healthier environment for their children. Mia's growth. For Mia, the months following the custody battle were transformative. With Mark's encouragement, she enrolled in additional psychology courses, inching closer to her dream of becoming a counselor. Balancing work, school, and parenting wasn't easy, but she thrived on the challenge. One evening, as she sat at her small desk poring over her books, Liam walked in holding a crumpled piece of paper. "Mommy, look what I drew." Mia set her pen down and pulled him onto her lap. The drawing was simple but heartfelt. A stick figure family, her, Liam, Mark, and his kids, all holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. "Is this us?" Mia asked, her voice catching slightly. Liam nodded. "It's our family." The simplicity of his words broke through every doubt she'd ever had. They were a family. Not conventional, not perfect, but real. She hugged Liam tightly, whispering, "I love you so much." Mark's renewal. For Mark, life had shifted in ways he never thought possible. Where once he'd seen only failure and betrayal, he now saw opportunities for growth. He began volunteering at a mentorship program for young fathers, offering guidance to men navigating the complexities of parenting and relationships. One evening, after a particularly emotional session with a young father struggling to reconnect with his estranged wife, Mark returned home feeling a deep sense of purpose. He found Mia in the living room, reading a story to the kids. They were sprawled across the couch, heads resting on pillows, their eyes heavy with sleep. He stood in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. For the first time in years, he felt whole. Conclusion: the moral of the story. Months turned into a year, and the rhythms of their blended family became second nature. Holidays were shared, not divided. Beth even attended one of Liam's school plays, sitting beside Mark and Mia without the tension that had once defined their interactions. On a crisp spring morning, Mark and Mia decided to return to the lake. This time, it wasn't just the two of them. They brought the kids, who splashed in the water and skipped rocks along the shore. As the children played, Mark and Mia sat side by side on a weathered log. He took her hand in his, their fingers intertwining effortlessly. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked, his voice filled with quiet wonder. "All the time," Mia replied. She rested her head on his shoulder. "It's not what I expected, but it's everything I needed." Mark nodded, understanding her completely. Life had tested them in ways neither of them could have imagined, but those trials had only deepened their connection. The sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. The kids ran up to them, breathless and laughing, their energy infectious. Mark stood, pulling Mia to her feet. "Come on," he said, grinning. "Let's make some memories." The moral: as the family played by the water, their laughter echoing through the trees, the lesson of their journey became clear. Love isn't about finding perfection. It's about choosing each other every single day, even when it's hard. It's about forgiving past mistakes, embracing flaws, and building something new from the ashes of what was lost. Mark and Mia's story wasn't about fairy tale endings. It was about resilience, growth, and the courage to fight for happiness. For anyone listening, the message was simple. No matter how broken things might seem, it's never too late to rewrite your story. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, Mark and Mia stood together, surrounded by their children, their hearts full. It wasn't the end of their journey. It was the beginning of a life they had fought for, and one they would cherish forever.